President Barack Obama has reaffirmed Washington's intimate commitment to Israel's security. He assured Tel Aviv that no possible UN vote would be able to create an independent Palestinian state. Now, the annual AIPAC policy conference has taken place amid protests by Americans against the lobby's overreach in government. Marjan Assi has more from Washington.
As the annual American-Israel Public Affairs Committee Policy Conference took place in Washington, protesters gathered outside the convention to express their disappointment toward their representatives and others attending the conference.
This is just lobbyists that are coming today, a huge amount of lobbyists for more and more money. And we need the money here in our own country. Plus, they're using it for guns and weapons to destroy the Palestinian people.
We've seen that in our state of Massachusetts, where we just elected a state treasurer who is pretty high up and has been very high up in AIPAC, and now our governor has just gone to Israel and brought back contracts. So, it has a large effect on what goes on in our country.
At the conference, President Obama gave a speech in which he emphasized the unshakable ties between the U.S. and Israel.
The bonds between the United States and Israel are unbreakable, and the commitment of the United States to the security of Israel is ironclad.
Obama also backtracked on an earlier speech in which he discussed a Palestinian state with pre-1967 borders as agreed upon by the international community. Protesters here see Obama's speech at AIPAC as yet another example of the United States' unwavering support for Israel, putting the U.S. in no position to lead the so-called peace process in that part of the world. One protester, an Israeli activist, stated her views on the peace process.
There is no peace process because my people, the Israelis, keep taking everything they can because they have the power and the impunity to do so. There is no peace process in Israel-Palestine, and it is very much the fault of the U.S. because if the U.S. decided to stop providing the immense diplomatic and economic support to Israel, things would change.
Protesters included religious leaders, one of which discussed the impact of Christian Zionism on the Palestinian people.
So I think that Christian Zionism has been a very, very destructive force in supporting the occupation and helping to build the settlements, frankly. And those settlements are built on land that belongs to Palestinians. And they oppress the people, and they continually confiscate more land.
Protests began Friday on the arrival of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to Washington and will continue until Tuesday. Marjan Assi, Press TV, Washington.
Now, continuing further on that thought, we have Eugene Michael Jones, which is editor of Culture War magazine, through Skype from Indiana. Eugene, thanks for joining us. And my first question, generally speaking, what does AIPAC 4 mean for a United States president? And how much of a policy statement do you expect from a U.S. president standing there?
Well, I think what happened here is that Obama just lost all the initiative and all the momentum that he had gained by that speech. His intention was to get out in front of the Arab Spring pro-democracy movements, and now he's lost that ability by basically contradicting virtually everything he said in the speech. This also shows what a roadblock the Israel lobby is in America toward any peaceful solution in the Middle East. Every politician feels he has to grovel in front of the Israel lobby, and AIPAC is one of the major instruments of that Israel lobby. And as a result, the United States can't pursue its own political interests.
Well, Eugene, let me ask you this. Israel has been the largest recipient of direct U.S. military aid, which is an indication of the degree of support Israel receives from the U.S. Congress. Now, has there been any cost-benefit analysis of this relationship?
Yes, Walton Mearsheimer did a book on the Israel lobby that dealt with this. This is not the point of their book, for which they were demonized and ostracized, is that this is not in America's interest, this support. And now you have the added factor, which Obama mentioned in his speech, where he's talking about financial difficulties in America. Well, who in America feels that it's in our interest, the interest of American citizens, to be sending all this money over to Israel when they're saying they can't meet pension obligations, and they're going to have to cut back on Medicare and Medicaid, and they're even threatening to cut back on Social Security. This is political suicide from that perspective.
And finally, Dr. Jones, in context of the relationship between Washington and Tel Aviv, who is benefiting the most from that bond?
Well, obviously, Tel Aviv is benefiting. The United States is not benefiting from this. But I think what you're seeing here is an example of overreach. You know, this is a chronic problem throughout Jewish history of just pushing too far and then creating a reaction which you can't control. And the other issue is that the Jews are consoled if they have the leader on their side, but oftentimes, as we saw in Egypt, the leader is not being followed by his own people, and soon he's not the leader anymore. And so what we have here is a lost initiative, and now what's going to happen, we'll have to see what the political outcome of, for example, the struggle in Libya is going to be. And that will have an impact on what happens in the fall when they try and proclaim the Palestinian state.
Well, Dr. Jones, thank you for joining us on this episode of World News and sharing your thoughts on the U.S.-Israeli support